You might recall an interview we conducted about this time last week with the founder of the Australian Vaccination Network, McLeod. Now, a court had ruled that the Australian Vaccination Network should change its name because the name does not reflect what the organisation is actually about. The organisation is made up of a group of fringe dwellers who don't believe that you should vaccinate yourself or your children, and they have all sorts of weird cockamamie theories about vaccinations. And you should have seen the email traffic I got after my rather confronting interview with Merrill last week. Indeed, I got an email from our next guest, Ken McLeod. We'll talk to Ken in a moment. Here's just a reminder of some of the disinformation peddled around by Merrill Dory.
The government in New South Wales has spent millions of dollars trying to shut down our tiny little parent support group. And that money could have been used to do something.
Well, that's because they considered the things that you're suggesting are dangerous.
Is scientific debate ever dangerous? Is it dangerous to allow...
Well, suggesting people not vaccinate their children and then send...
Okay, we have never said that, and the judge actually said that. There is no evidence that we have ever told anyone that they should or should not. So
no one from your organisation ever has suggested people not vaccinate their children?
Our code of ethics has been around since the organisation started, and it says specifically, no A.V.N. member must ever tell another person that they must not vaccinate or that they must vaccinate. Our role is simply as a forum.
Well, Ken, that's interesting. Is that right? They've never ever said don't vaccinate? Good evening to you.
Good evening, yes. I think it is actually true, but it's a very clever way of wriggling out of the issue. What the A.V.N. does, and this story does, is just tell hundreds and hundreds of lies about vaccines and then say, well, it's up to you. So, technically speaking, they don't advise people not to vaccinate, but they certainly mislead them to an incredible extent.
The emotion surrounding this issue is quite disproportionate, I would have thought, with the topic itself. The Australian Vaccination Network and its supporters are masters at getting online and ripping into anyone who dares to question whether their judgment's a good judgment or a bad judgment.
Well, that's true. Ordinary people like myself have been on the receiving end, but even prominent doctors and professors are also on the receiving end, and the Australian Medical Association have been accused of being in the pay of Big Pharma and so on. I mean, just total rubbish. So anyone who puts their head above the parapet is likely to attract their attention.
What are some of the more outrageous things they have suggested?
Well, Ms. Dorian herself has come up with the theory on occasion that the flu vaccine, for example, was a clever way of the government trying to insert microchips in people so that they can control people. The other theory...
What?
Yes, I've got that in writing.
So vaccinations were were about putting microchips into people so you could be controlled by the government.
Yeah, and the other one was a similar sort of accusation that the flu vaccine that was being promoted a couple of years ago contained a hidden contraceptive, so that would control the population. There was another accusation after a court case that vaccination is rape. I'm just sort of going through the list here that homeopathy is the way to vaccinate people. There's been fraudulent appeals for donations around collecting money to pay for bounty bag inserts when the bounty bag company had never heard of the A.V.N. There was no arrangement at all.
They've also sent hate mail to the parents of a 4-week-old baby who died of
Yes.
After not being vaccinated?
That's quite true. That made the papers a while ago. We've identified, our group, the Stop the Australian Vaccination Network, our group has identified 4 families that were harassed by the A.V.N. and their spear carriers because the families, after the death of their children, had the temerity to say that vaccines are a good thing.
What motivates these people?
I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I did a little bit of psychology at one time. I find the whole subject fascinating. People who are against vaccines can usually form a mindset where they're against such things as fluoridation, public health measures. They can believe in quite bizarre conspiracy theories, such as chemtrails you might not have heard of. But certainly with the vaccine element, there's a great fear that there's some form of government coercion that's trying to control the population, that vaccines don't work, which doesn't make much sense because the pharmaceutical companies sell vaccines, and you would think the pharmaceutical companies would benefit and make greater profits if more people got sick. So there's a lot of contradictory claims in there as well. None of it makes sense.
It's interesting, too, that you can pinpoint where a lot of the supporters of a group like this actually come from or live. The far north coast of New South Wales is a particular hotbed, isn't it, of the Australian Vaccination Network's influence?
Yes, there's been some studies on that, on the population demographics on such places where you find a large anti-vaccine, anti-fluoride population, and you're right, around Byron Bay, but also in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, where you would think that people were slightly different. It's much more. It's quite difficult for someone like myself to nail down what it is. On one hand, you've got the anti-government or the anti-conspiracy theory type people, and then you've got what some people call the doctors' wives, who are quite well educated and of course are much too young to have seen these diseases in real life.
This organisation was able to fundraise, and then that was, I think, their ability to fundraise was stopped. They appealed and got that back. Where are they getting the funds to fight these court cases?
Well, you'd have to ask them, of course, because the
wouldn't be cheap.
Well, no, they say they get some representation pro bono, and that's probably partly true. But the financial records that we've been able to obtain are quite scatty. They're quite a mess, and they don't go into the paying for legal cases and so on. We know that the New South Wales government's had a great deal of difficulty getting the required financial data out of them for many years.
What's the story of Meryl Dorey? What do you know about her?
Quite a bit. American-born from Brooklyn, New York. Claims to have been a Wall Street stockbroker, but when I asked her to substantiate that, she got quite annoyed. As far as we know, no qualifications or any experience at all in any health field, let alone anything else, but has appointed herself and bills herself on posters and so on as Australia's leading expert on vaccination, which is quite laughable, with no qualifications or experience at all.
And obviously this court decision to force them to change their name, you'd welcome that? Absolutely,
and I put in one complaint, and I understand the AMA put in another, but I've not seen it. But full congratulations go to the Minister for Fair Trading here, Anthony Roberts, and also the opposition spokesman on the health, Dr. Andrew McDonald. The New South Wales Parliament is absolutely united in its attempts to put an end to the deceptive behaviour of the A.V.N.
Well, more power to your arm, Ken. I think you speak a lot of sense. The amount of vitriol that comes back, and I'll get it again in emails tomorrow, I suppose, after our conversation tonight. You've experienced it. They are quite off the radar when it comes to trying to defend their position, and the stuff you get sent to you and get jammed down your throat is just quite extraordinary.
It is, and if I could put in a plug for our group.
Go for it, yeah.
Find us on Facebook, and it's Stop the Australian Anti-Vaccination Network. We've got 10,800 followers. About half of them are doctors and scientists, nurses, radiologists, and so on. But the other half are ordinary people like myself.
What's your motivation to get involved?
I'm old enough, if you couldn't pick it by the voice, that I've seen polio in real life. I saw my sister get polio. I saw other kids in my school when I was very young, die of vaccine-preventable diseases. And when I heard about Miss Dory and the A.V.N. harassing grieving parents, I thought, and other people too, thought that enough was enough and something had to be done in the absence of any government action to take them on. And, of course, lately in the last year or so, we've seen quite a bit of government action, and no doubt at all we'll see some more.
Well, good on you. It's nice to talk to you, Ken. Anytime you need to plug your organisation, give us a call.
Thank you very much. Good night, Steve.
Ken McLeod there, 17 minutes to 11 o'clock, please. Don't ring me if you are pro or if you are anti-vaccination, I should say. I simply do not want to hear from you. It is just a ridiculous argument.